Warning: contains somewhat mature content, including language, brief violence, and mild sexual themes, and may not be suitable for people under age 14.
Cho just sat there and cried, hugging her doll. She laid down, setting her head on a pillow. The pillow was hard. She sat back up, rubbing her head, as it was now throbbing from hitting something that was inside the pillowcase. She stuck her hand inside and felt around, coming to what felt like a thin book. Cho pulled it out and looked at it. The book was black with red words on the cover that said Diary. She opened it and saw pages scrawled with childish writing. She saw many words misspelled. The first page was dated at least 20 years ago. She read it, wiping her tears away. Dear Diary, today is when Mommy gave me you. I'm very happy now I get to tell you of everything that hurts me bad. I hope that you can help me be happy. Now you are my only friend. Love, Reitanna. Cho finished reading the first page, frowning. Reitanna had to be at least 5 years old when he wrote this. She skipped a few pages until she found a spot where she supposed that he was about 11. Dear Diary, today some stupid kid spilled his milk on me at lunch. He did it on purpose, too. He walked right up to me, laughed, and then dumped it on my head. He said, "Oops, I mistook you for a trash can." I want to kill him. I got home today smelling of sour milk. Mother wasn't home, but Father was. He asked me why I smelled so bad and smacked me. I have a big purple spot on my cheek now. Mother came home and they were yelling for hours. He blamed her for having me, and that it was the worst mistake she ever made. Cho skipped a few more pages to where he was probably 16 or so, and began to read once more. Dear Diary, I hate my life. These people all around me are stupid and hideous. I don't even know why they're here. If there was a God, he would never allow people to become so shallow and heartless. Today I was ambushed in the hallway by the tennis team. They were heading out to practice and said I was in their way, but they had plenty of room to go around me. They began hitting me with their rackets. I was so badly injured I had to go to the nurse's office for the remainder of the day. I went home early and got scolded by my father for ditching school. I told him I was sent home by the nurse, but he didn't believe me. Right now I'm in the hospital as I write this, but now I have to go. The nurse says the doctor will be in here in a minute to help stitch up the wounds that refuse to stop bleeding. Cho turned to the last page that had writing on it. It was dated to only 5 years ago. She was about to read it when the diary was snatched out of her hands. Cho gasped and looked up to see Reitanna standing in front of her, holding his diary. His hair was wet and brushed back, and he had no shirt on, only some baggy black sweatpants. Why are you reading my diary? He asked smoothly, face emotionless. I just found it, stuttered Cho. Reitanna furrowed his brow. Trying to find something to blackmail me with? It won't work. Nothing in here can be used as blackmail. He looked at the page she was about to read. Have you read this page yet? Cho shook her head. No, she muttered, frightened. Reitanna cleared his throat and began to read. Dear Diary, yesterday something very odd, but very great happened to me. I was walking home from work. I had the night shift that night because Shiro was sick. I was close to my home when I was pulled into an alley by the usual bastards who are always beating me up. But this time, they beat me nearly to death. I was bleeding everywhere as they ran from the alley and my vision was going dark. At that moment, a large demon came and offered me a chance to live and also to possess some demonic powers, all in exchange for me working for him. I accepted, and he gave me some of his power. He told me I have 24 hours to do what I liked in the human world. Then I was to report back to the alley. I went and killed my parents, then killed every other person who had ever done me wrong, especially those guys who nearly killed me. Then, as promised, I met the demon in the alley. I have been put into a demon's training academy. I am being trained to be a warrior. I have a nice home now. I am sure I will be happy now that I am the company of creatures who think like me. Reitanna finished reading and looked at Cho, who looked dismal. You, she began. You've had a horrible life. Reitanna nodded slowly, closing the diary and setting it on his bedside table. Yes, but it's all better now. So much better that I haven't needed to write in my diary for 5 years. Cho hung her head. I'm sorry for reading it, she muttered. No, it's all right, said Reitanna. Save me the trouble of telling my story to you verbally. He sat next to her, and Cho scooted away slightly. Raiden sighed and looked around. All right, now where are you going to sleep? He asked, mostly to himself. I could sleep on the floor, Cho suggested. Raiden shook his head. No, that'd be rude of me to make you do that, he said. You can sleep in my bed with me. What? No, I will not, shouted Cho. Calm down, said Raiden, looking at her. You will sleep in my bed. You don't need to worry, I won't touch you, but I don't want you feeling uncomfortable. I will be uncomfortable if I have to sleep with you, said Cho. Raiden laughed. You'll change your mind. I'm not that bad of a guy. He gently picked her up and tucked her into his bed. Cho frowned, struggling to get out of his arms. Sit still, said Raiden softly. Cho obeyed as Raiden made sure the blankets were covering her. Raiden climbed into bed next to her and waved his hand in one swift motion, the candles lighting the room all extinguished, and he lay down. Cho scooted away as much as possible so that she was nearly falling off the large bed. Raiden chuckled softly. Good night, Miss Paranoid. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. Cho turned over, facing away from him and frowning. She cuddled her rag doll, feeling miserable. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see Tomoko, wanted to make sure she was okay. Cho closed her eyes and drifted into the first dreamless sleep she had had for months. Cho woke up to see a bright white light shining in through the window at the end of the room. She figured it was morning now. She flipped over and blinked, seeing Raiden had turned on his side and was sleeping, facing her. Cho stared at him for a minute or two. She really hated to even think it, but she thought he was too handsome. Someone as handsome as Raiden should not have had a horrible life, forcing him to join forces with an army of demons. Cho sat up slowly, looking around. She saw 2 huge double doors across from her. She looked at Raiden, then carefully climbed out of bed and tiptoed to the doors. She took a deep breath and flung them open, running out of the room. She didn't get very far. As soon as she stepped out of Raiden's room, she was halted by 2 spears crisscrossing in front of her, blocking her path. Cho frowned and looked to either side of her. The spears were being held by 2 identical blue demons, only just taller than an average human. They smiled evilly at her, and Cho felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around to see Raiden had awoken. Good job, you 2, he told the demons. Remind me to reward you later. The demons smiled greedily at each other, looking excited. Cho frowned and hung her head. Raiden put his arm around her. Are you hungry? He asked her. Cho looked up at him. No, she said, but her stomach growled loudly. Raiden laughed as Cho blushed. Let's go down to the kitchen, he said, and his guards took their spears away, clearing the path. Raiden led Cho out of the room and down a huge flight of stairs. They entered a very nice kitchen made of black marble. There was a sort of bar to sit at instead of a table, and inside the bar was a fridge, stove, and sink. There was a chandelier hanging from the ceiling with about 8 red candles lighting up the room. Raiden sat Cho on a stool at the bar, then moved inside it, looking in the fridge. What do you like to eat, Cho? He asked. Cho hesitated before answering. Rice, red bean paste, and strawberries? She suggested, remembering what Tomoko had made her on occasions. Raiden stood up and slowly looked at her. Are you joking? He asked, amused. Cho shook her head. My best friend made it for me, she replied. Raiden shrugged and pulled some stuff out of the fridge. He began cooking for her. I'm glad I have a fellow human to cook for, he said, glancing at her. I always feel awkward being one of the only life forms in this world who needs to eat. Cho gave a nervous laugh and then cast her gaze down to the surface of the bar. Raiden frowned. You okay? This isn't about me catching you trying to escape, is it? Cho didn't answer. Raiden sighed and walked over to her. Listen, you need to stay at my side at all times, otherwise you might end up getting killed. Cho looked at him. You'd kill me if I escaped? She asked, horrified. Raiden laughed. No, not me, he said. But any demon would. If they saw a human like you running around, they wouldn't hesitate to kill you slowly and painfully. But they'd know I was with you, wouldn't they? Asked Cho. Not all of them, he replied. But even if some of them did know, they wouldn't care. They'd kill you anyway. Demons are nothing like humans, Cho. Raiden went back over to continue cooking. How? Cho began, hesitant. How are they not like humans?
Well, said Raiden slowly, appearance, obviously, but mainly emotionally. A demon's emotions are completely different than a human's.
Cho tilted her head. Explain, she said.
A demon does not feel sadness, sympathy, or mercy, nor do they feel love. They feel lust, anger, greed, and the only time they feel happy is when they have done something that humans consider evil. Their emotions are completely twisted. We cannot understand them just as much as they cannot understand us. In fact, it'd be foolish trying to even reason with a demon.
He took the rice pot off the stove and transferred the rice to a bowl. He added the bean paste and strawberries and set them in front of Cho, then made a bowl of just rice for himself. Do you still have human emotions? Asked Cho as she began to eat. Raiden brought his bowl over and sat next to her.
Of course I do. I may have a demon's abilities, but I'm still human,
he replied, eating as well. They ate together in silence, thinking about the short conversation they had had. Raiden finished and brought his bowl to the sink. He waited patiently for Cho to finish, and when she did, he took her bowl to the sink as well. Cho hopped off the stool and Raiden put his arm around her again, going back up to his room. His guards greeted him and bowed their heads as he entered the room with Cho. Cho sat on the bed, snatching up her doll. She looked over to Raiden and noticed he was scanning her. Cho frowned. What? She asked. Raiden shook his head.
You have no other clothes besides that nightgown, do you?
He asked. Cho looked down at her white nightgown. Well, it's not like you gave me a chance to pack, she replied sarcastically. Raiden laughed.
All right, he said. No need to get an attitude.
He went over and opened the doors to speak to his guards.
Send in Nestle,
he told them. He walked away, leaving the door open. A few minutes later, a small demon came into the room, carrying a stack of clothes. She had to be about 3 feet tall, her skin soft red and yellow, and she had forest green cat eyes that matched her short, messy hair. She had little red horns, pointed elf-like ears, and a small tail, and was wearing what looked like a dark green vinyl bikini. Her little body was also a bit out of proportion.
Master called me,
she said in an emotionless but high-pitched voice.
Yes, my friend here needs some clothes,
Raiden replied. Nestle scuttled over to Cho and set the stack of clothes on the bed.
These should fit you. If not, I'll fix them for you,
she told her. Cho nodded, watching Nestle bow to Raiden and scuttle out of the room. Raiden shut the doors and turned to Cho.
Well, go on to the bathroom and try something on,
he said. Cho blushed and took the clothes into the bathroom. After a few minutes, Cho came out, frowning. She was wearing a black outfit that looked like a one-piece swimsuit, except it had a short frilly layered skirt attached to it, making her legs look very long. What is this? She exclaimed. All those outfits are slutty. This was like the only thing I could find that covered most of me. Raiden laughed hard and Cho frowned more. What is so funny?
In this world, it's normal to wear that kind of clothing, even for males,
Raiden explained.
If you wore clothing that covered you, you'd be laughed at. Being made fun of by a demon is 10 times worse than being made fun of by another human. Trust me.
Cho frowned, trying to pull the fluffy skirt down, attempting to make it longer. Raiden chuckled and walked over to her, gently grabbing her hands and keeping them away from her skirt. She looked up at him, blushing.
Stop fiddling with it. You look beautiful,
said Raiden softly. Cho frowned and tried to pull away from him, but Raiden held her closer, placing a hand on her thigh, moving to kiss her collarbone gently. Stop, Cho stuttered, frightened.
You're telling me to stop,
said Raiden.
But your body is telling me to keep going.
Cho struggled as he dipped her backwards slightly, kissing her jaw now. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and one of Raiden's guards came running in.
Master, I have important
He froze, staring at Raiden and Cho. Raiden sighed and looked over at the guard.
Have you ever heard of knocking?
He said angrily. The guard bowed his head quickly, and Raiden let Cho go. She ran to the bed, shaking with fear.
My deepest apologies,
said the guard.
But I have important news. The Emperor, Dracus, has called to see you immediately. He wants you to bring along the human female.
Raiden's eyes widened and looked to Cho, then back to the guard.
Thank you. You may leave,
he said, voice shaking slightly. The demon guard left, and Cho watched Raiden as he quickly got his shirt on. He hurried over to Cho, setting some boots next to her.
Put those on, quickly!
Cho frowned and put the boots on her feet, lacing them up. Raiden opened a hole in the air and pulled Cho through it.